Hey guys, man, that's the way I like to start off our sermons. Is just with that awesome beat, man. I love it. So I hope you guys are having a great week. Hey, if you're here in person, I want to welcome you. If you're online, I want to welcome you. If you're first-time guest, we do have a gift for you that we would love to provide. You can drop that in the comments that you're first time, or you can email hello@redemptionroanoke.com and get that. It's a gift card to Chick-fil-A, so who doesn't want that? Hope that you'll take advantage of that if this is your first time viewing with us or worshiping with us here in person. But hey, I just wanted to say a special welcome to you. We're in a series right now called We Are the Movement. All right, we've talked about how we're ambassadors. That's who we are. We're ambassadors for God's kingdom if we put our trust in Jesus. And we've talked about how people are the mission, right? And people are also the strategy, because God's heart is for people in the world, but he uses his people to reach those people in the world, right? He uses us, his church. So that's how things are going. And last week we actually heard from Charles Wilson. I don't know about you guys, but that was really just encouraging to my soul personally. So I was really glad to have him here. He talked about endurance. And he talked about how even when it's hard, we go back to the mission. And the mission is our motivation for why we're even planting a church in the first place. And I love that he acknowledged so many of the hardships that we've probably faced personally as church planters here in Roanoke. He's been through it before, and so that was just really nice to hear from him. And next week, we're going to finish out our sermon series, and it'll be the last time that we meet here at the Y at 4 o'clock. So that'll be really cool, right? I'm really looking forward to that. So we're going to be at the Grandin Theater after that for the work day on the 14th of March at 10 o'clock, in the morning. Like in the morning, you can't sleep in until 11 now, so that'll be really cool. I'm looking forward to that. So make sure that you start inviting people to Easter. We'll talk about that now. But this week, we're going to talk about engaging the culture. All right, that's our topic for today. We want to understand how, if we're ambassadors, then that pushes us to go out to God's mission field, the culture, And we need to practically ask, all right, well, if that's the case, how do we reach them? I want this to be a very practical sermon in some ways for you guys today. How do we engage people in the culture? Well, first, I think we have to understand the culture. We have to understand what the culture's after, and we're going to talk about this more today. But the culture will often push us, because our faith is so personal, to keep it private. I have a good example for you guys. This happened last year when Evelyn was in kindergarten. All right, now she was 5 at the time, but she came home one day and told us something very concerning about 2 months in to her being in the public school system. She said, hey, so-and-so, my friend, was praying at lunch today, and the teacher came up to her and told her she had to stop. So the teacher told her to stop praying. Her friend, whoever her friend was, she's praying over a meal. These are 5 and 6-year-olds. And so I wasn't sure what to take. She's 5, right? So her perspective is a 5-year-old's perspective. But, I think she was probably not lying, because she's 5. And what 5-year-old would know how to make that up or pretend in that way? We questioned her and tried to get to the bottom of it. But at the end of the day, I think she was telling the truth. The teacher just told this girl to stop praying. It wasn't allowed in public school. And I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't sure whether I ought to call down there and say, hey, that was illegal what you did. I want to have some words with you guys. That started to well up within me, that frustration and that anger. And I didn't do that, thankfully. I didn't do anything. I don't know whether that was the right thing or not. The only thing I did was teach Evelyn that, hey, baby, your teacher was wrong, right? You need to listen to your teachers, but sometimes they're wrong, and your teacher was wrong to do that. So I took the approach of pouring into my child, but maybe I should have called down there. I'm not sure. Maybe I should have called down there, because at the end of the day, our faith, it's not private. It's not a private faith. That's all the teacher was trying to do, right? The teacher was just trying to tell that little girl, hey, your personal faith needs to be kept private. You need to keep that at home. It's not for the public. And that's just not how our faith is. Christianity, the implications aren't just personal. They're not even just national. They're not even just international. They're global. They're even cosmic. Those are the implications of Christianity and this message that we're talking about today. So I can't keep it personal. If it's really true, it affects everything in the world, right? It's not personal. It's cosmic. It's a story that threads its way through the fabric of our lives in every possible way. Even if we're not Christians, that's what it means. So as ambassadors of this true story of the whole world, we can call it, we need to give the culture the gospel. We need to give them that story. And that's the main point for today. If you're taking notes, we need to give the gospel. That's what we're all about here. We need to give people this true story. Our faith isn't private. It needs to be shared with others, even if it's not something they're looking for. Even if they don't want the gift that we want to give, it's still up to us to offer that gift to them anyway. They might even try to stifle it, tell us to keep it at home. They still need to be given the gospel message. We're going to see here in our text today why that's the case. We're going to see how Paul addresses this, because some will believe when we give them the gospel. Some will mock, some will scoff, but some people will believe. So we're going to see that as we read our text. We're going to be in Acts chapter 17 today, starting in verse 16. And I'm going to read a good little chunk here. So try to follow along, and it's a good story. I wanted to kind of read the whole chapter, but it was too much. So we'll start at verse 16. And this is when Paul gets into Athens, when he's on one of his missionary/church planting journeys. So here goes. Now while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you're very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation and of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed." He's talking about Jesus. "And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead." And now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. But others said, "We'll hear you again about this." So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So, here you go. Let's jump into this. Paul is in Athens, and he's waiting for his friends Silas and Timothy and probably Luke, because he just came from Berea, where he was being persecuted by Jews who followed him there from Thessalonica. Okay, so he's just moving on down the coast here, and he gets to Athens, and he's waiting for them. And Athens in Paul's time was at the height of human philosophy and culture. This was the seat of a lot of culture. Even in the Roman Empire, Athens was still a very important city with a lot of impact for the entire empire. And as Paul arrives there, he sees the spiritual state of people and their idolatry that was present there, and his spirit was provoked, the text says. Now that phrase, his spirit is provoked, is similar to what God had felt in Old Testament texts when he saw people worshiping idols. Okay, he was provoked. His spirit was provoked or angered by their idolatry. So it seems like Paul maybe was having a little bit of righteous indignation here at how the people in one of the greatest cities on earth at the time didn't know the Creator God. They didn't worship the God that he knew. And man, that frustrated him. They lived by man-made philosophies, or they worshiped lesser gods. How many of us feel that way today in our culture? Do you guys feel frustrated by things? I mean, I'd venture to say a lot of us. When I told the story about Evelyn, did that frustrate you? I mean, it frustrated me, I'm not going to lie. You get frustrated, you get provoked at that, right? Maybe you're frustrated that academia and the school system is not friendly to prayer or faith anymore. Maybe you're frustrated that Christian morality is constantly under fire, constantly marginalized and pushed further and further to the outskirts. Maybe you're frustrated by things like the transgender movement, right? Maybe you're frustrated by a lot of these things, I don't know. As Christians, we have to understand how to deal with that, though, because the thing I want you to notice isn't Paul's frustration and provocation. What I want you to notice is his response to it. It's easy for us to get frustrated at things, but what did Paul do when he got frustrated or he got provoked? He saw the idolatry. What did he do? He felt frustration, but did he talk down to people? Did he post angry, sarcastic comments on social media? Did he even try to take political action? Go out and march in front of the Capitol or something with signs? Did he immediately separate himself from the culture so as not to be tainted by them? Did he step back and say, I'm not going to have any part of it? No, he didn't do any of that, did he? What did he do? He engaged people. He talked to people. He went and had conversations with them where they are. He was frustrated at their idolatry, but not them personally. You see that? It wasn't personal. He was frustrated they weren't worshiping God, but he wasn't frustrated with them. He loved them. So he started talking to people. So that's what I want you guys to write down as a point here. Talk to people, man. Just go do it, Talk to people, right? It's like have conversations with people. Get into a relationship with somebody. Paul goes and does this where he can listen to people and they'll listen to him. And he talks to people of his own ethnicity first, if you'll notice that. He goes to the Jews in the synagogues. But then he goes out to the marketplace where there's multiple ethnicities and he engages people who aren't like him or from his background. And he talks to people. Now, when did that stop being a thing for Christians in America? When did we stop talking to people? I mean, even if you're the most introverted person like I am, right? I mean, we still have our people that we could go talk to. The people that you have things in common with, or the people that congregate where you congregate, the people that do things you do, or know things you know, or talk like you talk. We all have that kind of people to go talk to. Recently listened to a Veritas forum. It was a good conversation at Harvard where two scholars were dialoguing on the topic, tolerance is not enough. That was the title of the forum. And the idea is that we can't simply tolerate people and other worldviews and other faiths that aren't like ours. We have to go the extra step. Tolerance is just not enough. We have to go the extra step and invite them into our lives. We have to get to know them. We have to have relationships with them. We have to have conversations with them about the similarities and the differences of our worldviews and our outlook and our perspective on life. You know what we call that here at Redemption Church when you invite somebody into a relationship with yourself? Hospitality. That's hospitality. That's one of our DNA points, one of our core values here. Hospitality, you're bringing people who aren't like you into your life. You're inviting them in, being hospitable to anybody that you come into contact with because you want to dialogue with them, you want a relationship with them, you care about them. I like what Vinoth Ramachandra, a former Hindu turned Christian, said in this podcast. He posits that tolerance, as our culture normally uses the term, this idea that everybody has the same truth and all religions lead to the same place, that kind of tolerance, he says is actually a form of disrespect for what others believe. Because as our views differ on fundamental truths and reality, to say they're somehow all the same in the end, or that they're all basically the same, is to dismiss some of the basic tenets which are by nature exclusive. And that's relativism. That's what that kind of tolerance is. It's tolerance of that kind that's disrespectful because it fails to take into account the intricacies of a particular religious system or philosophy. So don't be disrespectful to people and just say, oh, it's all the same. No. Let's talk out our differences. Let's actually be adults and have relationships and conversations with people and say, yeah, we can disagree on these things, but still know one another and still love one another. That was his point. It was that even if you never end up agreeing with somebody on anything, hardly, you're still showing them love and value and care for them and respect. And you're giving them a voice in your life, right? So that you understand their perspective better and they understand yours. That's what it means to engage with someone. That's what Paul was doing here, engaging the culture. It's listening to the culture for sure, but it's not just listening only, right? It's loving people in the culture. It's correcting the culture at times when that's necessary, or engaging in that way and saying, no, that's not right. But only after you've entered into a meaningful dialogue with someone, only after you've built some kind of relationship or they know that you care for them. And that's just general. That's not specifically every single time. Maybe you only have 2 minutes to make an impact on somebody and you feel like God wants you to share right then and there and correct their wrongs or whatever. But in general, this is what God does. And this is what Paul was doing here. He was going and talking to people in the marketplace and in the synagogues. He wasn't just having one-off conversations and saying, I'm done with you. He was engaging them. Tolerance isn't enough for an ambassador of God's kingdom. there has to be more. There has to be love. There has to be intimacy and relationship. Now, another thing to point out here is that Paul doesn't keep his faith private. I talked about it at the beginning of the sermon, right? So you can write this down. Our faith in Jesus is certainly personal. It's deeply personal, right? But it's not private. We personally believe in something that has cosmic implications. So to keep this faith private, it's not only wrong for us, if it's true, it's impossible. It can't be contained. It can't be kept private. It will constantly come up because it's how reality works. It's the true story of the whole world. That's why I constantly harp on us here as a church not to let the culture silence you when it comes to sharing the gospel with people. Man, you're in the hospital, you're in academia, you're in the office, doesn't matter. Acts chapter 4 shows us how Peter and John they try to silence them. And they say, no, we can't help but speak on things that we've seen and heard. We just can't help it. We have to share. We can't be silenced. We can't stay silent, even when our professor or our employer or somebody else tells us we should. And I'm not saying you go around sharing the gospel when it's inappropriate. There are appropriate times, right? It's probably not appropriate for a surgical nurse to try to share the gospel with the doctor while she's in the middle of a procedure with him, right? hey, I know you're cutting, but hey, let me share something with you, right? No. There are appropriate times to do that, but it's really easy for us to understand when those times are appropriate, I think. Maybe there's a lull in your day, and you're having a 10-minute break with somebody, and you're in there getting a drink of water, or you're eating lunch together. Man, that's a super simple time to engage with somebody and ask them, hey, what's going on in your life? Do you go to church anywhere? What do you believe about this? What do you think about that? It's super easy to understand when it's appropriate and when it's not, and we need to get good at doing that kind of thing. Maybe you need to invite somebody over to your house for dinner. Maybe you need to engage somebody and say, hey, you want to go hang out after work today for an hour? I don't know what it is, but the point is Christianity has such wide-reaching, life-altering implications. We can't keep it private. It just can't be contained. It affects everything and everyone. And so we need to be there for that. And we see that here in the text as Paul engaged both Stoics and Epicureans. That's what he's starting to get at here when he talks about the two different philosophies of the day. These are kind of philosophical schools of thought in that time. They're the extremes. You know, we have the extremes in our culture, but it's really interesting. You can write this down if you're taking notes. The gospel story is greater than the culture stories. That's what we see as he engages these philosophical thoughts, because the gospel provides a greater, more complete perspective on the deepest human issues that we all face in this life. Now, this is going to be a massive oversimplification, so if you know philosophy, you'll just have to forgive me. I only have so much time, and this will probably be a long sermon anyway, so there you go. But I'm going to try to be quick about this. Basically, Stoics were all about morality and rationalism. That was their extreme. But then the other side of the pendulum is the Epicureans, who were all about pleasure and feelings. So the Stoics were what you do and what you think. That's what they were all about. And the Epicureans were about what you desire and what you feel. And it's interesting that they kind of line up with our two extremes in our culture today. Funny how that works, right? I mean, this is however many thousands of years ago, and that's still playing itself out in Western history and Western culture. But you know, in our day, in America, we see people either thinking that life is all about the rules and what you do, morality, thinking rationally, this kind of thing, or it's all about living your own truth now and feeling good in life. You do you, right? That kind of thing. But Paul engages both of those schools of thought here, and he recognizes that the gospel can not only go toe-to-toe with these philosophies, but it actually provides a better, more satisfying worldview by which to live your life. In other words, these kind of philosophies don't tell the whole story, but the gospel does. It gives you the entire story. So if it's really only about doing the right things, man, then you're going to constantly get frustrated at how poorly you can actually do those things. Yeah? Because only the gospel has the answer, that you'll never be perfect. You can never do all the right things all the time, but somebody did live perfectly for you in your place. Right? Or if it's all about living for your own personal pleasure and your desires, then you're going to be constantly frustrated that those things never fully satisfy you. They're never what you think they're going to be. So you start abusing yourself. Maybe you start abusing other people or objectifying them because you try to look for more and more and more satisfaction in this. It takes you down a rabbit hole you never thought you would go. It's a spiral downward. Because see, only the gospel has the answer to that kind of need. No greater pleasure can be found than in knowing the God of the universe. We need to understand that the gospel is the greater story here. It offers something that we don't have to be moral to get, and that satisfies us more than any physical pleasure ever could. And we got to learn to believe that as Christians, because that's the story we're telling the people. It's a story that the Bible tells us about a man named Jesus, who was the self-proclaimed King of the Jews, right? A prophetic figure called the Messiah in Jewish terminology. And he was supposed to deliver that nation of Israel from foreign oppression and reestablish the throne of David, one of the greatest kings of Israel's history ever. And he would do that forever, into eternity, right? But instead of conquering enemy nations, a physical sense, what did Jesus come to do? He came and conquered a greater enemy, death, by giving up his life in our place. I mean, death is the greatest enemy of all humans, not just Israel, not just one nation, but of everyone, right? Nobody wants to die. Nobody feels like we ought to die. That's the greatest enemy of humankind. We're supposed to live on forever. At least that's how we feel. That's how we live our lives every day, too, most of the time, is thinking that we're never going to die, right? It's our greatest enemy, and yet Jesus isn't just the king of the Jews if he does something about death, right? He's something so much more than just the king of one ethnic group, because he didn't just stay dead when he died on the cross for us. He rose from the grave by the power of his own Spirit, so that when we put our faith and hope in him, we get to rise from the dead one day with him. That's what Paul's talking about here, isn't it? When he's talking to these people in the Areopagus. When he got to the resurrection in verse 32, it says some mocked, right? Some people will hear us talking about raising from the dead or eternity or things like this, and they'll say, that's dumb. I don't want any part of that. But what else happened here? Some believed, didn't they? Some said, hey, we want to hear more about what you're saying. Let's go talk about this more. And then some believed. They ended up believing that Jesus wasn't just the king of the Jews. He's the king over all creation. You can write that down if you're taking notes. Jesus wasn't just king of the Jews. He was the king of all creation. And when you believe that, and you trust in this kind of king as your actual authority, okay? Not just your stated authority, not just somebody that you claim to be culturally, but somebody who actually affects your life, someone who actually changes your decisions and how you think and how you feel and how you walk through this world. That kind of authority, if he's your authority and he changes you, man, then your life is never going to be without meaning in this world, right? Guys, that's why we can never lose the gospel as our motivation while we're here planting this church. Doesn't matter what role you play in life or roles. Doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter what your ethnicity is or what your background is. This has to be our motivator, that we believe this story that's greater than all the other stories that the culture has to offer. It's what led the Christians in Paul's time to live so differently than the Roman culture around them in the empire. They avoided the cultural pitfalls of their day, right? Which are still the same for us, incidentally. Sex, money, and power, at least if we want to summarize it all, like just like that. Yeah? And yet so many people call Christians outdated or archaic, Stone Age, irrelevant, because we live differently. But that's just not the case, is it? All it is we've just been there, done that. We live that kind of lifestyle already. We understand what it looks like to live a restless life. We understand what it looks like to be depressed and frustrated and in despair and to live a meaningless life that ultimately ends in eternal death. See, we found something like a vast treasure in a field that we've sold everything to dig up and own, right? We want to share that with other people. We want to tell the culture that it's a better story. It's better than the stories they try to come up with, and it leads to life. It leads to satisfaction, and it's true. It's the true story of the whole world, and we're all a part of that. And I heard J.D. Greer, a pastor out of Raleigh, say this in one of his sermons. I'll paraphrase it. Basically, he said something like this: if Jesus really is the creator of all things, if he really is the God of the universe, then that kind of God can never be a means to the end of seeking a better life now. You can't use him to find happiness in other things. And that kind of God is better than everything. He's better than sex. He's better than money. He's better than power. That kind of God is satisfying, right? Sex can never satisfy your deepest longings for acceptance and love and comfort. Not even if you're married can sex do that. Only knowing God can. Money can never give you the security you're looking for. There's always volatility that leads to anxiety and fear and frustration. Only God's sovereignty can give you that security and that comfort that you're desperately desiring. And power or control, that can never give you what you're looking for in this life because it's just an illusion. We're never really fully in control of anything in this life anyway, right? We can barely control our own emotions, okay? We can't control anything. It's just an illusion. But God is in control of everything. He's sovereign over all things, and he's better. So God, in his good news, answers all of the cultural problems. He's better than the culture's stories. We can give them a better story as long as we ourselves believe it, right? As long as it's our motivator for sharing this good news. All right, so now I'm going to make a hard shift here. I'm going to take a hard right turn, all right? Because we don't have too much time left, and I want to spend the rest of my time getting you guys some practical information here. I want to use Paul as an example for this. This is how he shared the good news, and I'm sure that there's a lot of things that we could point out here about how he did that, strategically, methodologically, all of that kind of thing. But I just want to point out three things that I think are useful for us here in Roanoke. And the first thing that I want to point out is that Paul found the common ground, all right? That's the first thing. He found common ground with whoever he was talking to here. What were the things that they could agree on together? That's what common ground is, right? What could they agree on in life? And then he would use that as a jumping off point to talk to them. When Paul talked to his own people, he found common ground with the Jews in the synagogues by talking about the Scriptures, because that was their common ground. They all understood and believed that the Scriptures were from God, and so he started there. But when he reasoned with the Athenians, he took a more philosophical approach and poetic approach, right? Because what did they care about the Bible in Athens? They didn't care anything about it, and so he met them where they were. He quoted their own poets, for crying out loud. Poets that were talking about Zeus, other gods, but he quoted them and said, no, we got this wrong. Even some of your own poets say it this way, but I'm telling you, it's about the unknown God, right? So it'd be like us quoting a movie at somebody to enter into a deeper discussion on the gospel and saying, see how this works here? It doesn't work that way for real. It works this way with the gospel. This is really what it means. Now, I sort of did this when I was in Greensboro with one of our neighbors one time. I've probably done it before, but I'll give you a time where I kind of failed at it just a little bit, honestly. Because we were talking about Black Mirror, which is a show on Netflix. I don't know if you guys have heard of this. It's a really cool show. It's almost like a modern-day Twilight Zone, but it usually has a twist at the end, and it deals with human condition, really, and how technology affects humanity. And so it's usually always set just one or two steps ahead of technological advancements than what we actually have right now. And the one that we were talking about was talking about how people could be uploaded to some virtual computer for eternity, so that when they were getting ready to die, they upload themselves to this and they could live on. And so it was interesting because he thought that was awesome. He thought that was so cool. What a cool concept. Man, this is really neat. And I was like, man, I totally disagree. It sounds more like a virtual hell than a virtual heaven. Why would you want to virtually exist and try to create your own purpose and live really basically just this meaningless life in a disembodied state that's not really real, you know? I mean, God offers us a better story, doesn't he? Like we get to have real bodies. That's the whole idea of the restoration and heaven on earth. We get to live with meaning and purpose the way that God's designed us. And I think I just totally shut the conversation down because then we started talking about something else, you know? It's like, I went to where we disagree, right? And that's not what Paul does at all. He goes to where they have common ground, and he says, well, I can imagine him in this scenario saying, man, that's really interesting that you think this is so cool about eternity and living on forever. What do you think is going to happen when you die? Man, what is your worldview? How do you believe about this particular issue? If I'd have just continued in a conversation, found that common ground, because I could have said, man, I think that's so cool too. Eternity, like I have this concept of living on forever, you know? I could have found the common ground there and done that a little bit better. It is what it is. God can use it, you know. He's sovereign, so I appreciate that. Glad there's grace. I just thought I'd give you that as an example. I think that's really interesting. The Bible offers a better alternative, and Paul would find the common ground. We can too. So what are some questions that you can ask people that you see this week? What are some questions to see what you have in common? What are some of the things that you guys believe that are in common? Because I'm not just talking about hobbies or TV shows, although those can be ways to enter into a deeper conversation. But what do you believe about life? What do you believe about morality? What kind of worldview do they have? How do they make decisions in their life? What is it that motivates them every day? You know? How do they determine what's right and wrong? Who do they worship? What does that look like for them to even have a concept of worship? And then what can you affirm in that? And what can you agree with as you ask these questions? Start there. Even if the conversation goes no further right then. What can you affirm? Look for that common ground. The second thing that I want to point out about Paul's method is that he played on their natural knowledge of God. So Paul played on their natural knowledge of God. It's this idea that everybody knows God to some extent. They either trust him more and more in their lives, or they either reject him and are rejecting him actively. But everybody knows something. That's the Christian worldview. Right or wrong? I mean, we believe it's right. That's why we believe it. That's what Paul says here. But it's the idea that Well, I'll quote Romans 1. This is what he says in Romans 1, 20 and 22, or 21. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking. Their foolish hearts were darkened. So Paul's saying everybody actually knows God. They have some concept of God. That's how we all started. The problem is we rebelled. The problem is we pushed God out. We didn't want to have a relationship with God, and now some people suppress that knowledge of God. As an ambassadors, what we get to do is we get to wake people up to that. We get to enter in. We get to affirm, find the common ground. We get to start waking that back up in people. Yeah, let's talk about eternity. Let's talk about morality. Where does some of this come from in your life? What's going on? Let's wake that up. That's what Paul's doing here for these people. You know what that means? When you share the gospel, you're tapping into something deep in the soul of whoever it is you're talking to. Man, they don't even realize that that's there, but it's going to resonate as true. It's going to be intriguing to them, or it's going to be completely off-putting because they're going to totally reject. They're going to have an angry experience, right? Because they don't want it to be true. But for some, it's going to resonate. Some are going to believe. Some are going to want to hear more. And Paul did this with the Athenians. He saw the statue to the unknown God there. He used that to tell them that they actually knew the unknown God that they were talking about. They had some kind of concept of that. You know, it's got to be one reason why he gives them this kind of compliment that he does. You remember that in the text? He gives them a compliment. He says, I perceive that you're very religious. What did he mean by that? Well, I think he was trying to help them see that God was there all along, not far from any of them, right? That all they have to do is reach out and pursue this creator God because he's drawing them to himself. So for us, for example, if we're talking to somebody who's not a Christian, okay, in our culture, being intellectually honest is highly valued. So for them, that's why he gives them the compliment. Being religious was very valuable to them. So we could look at somebody and say, man, I see that you're being intellectually honest. You know, we can see that you're being rational. We can see that you are trying to think honestly and you're trying to find the truth. And you know what, man? I think that's a gift from God that you're able to think that way. So there's some common grace, right? There's a common grace kind of concept here. For the relativist, we could say, hey, I recognize that you really want to make everyone in the world thrive, that you want everybody to be happy, that you want everybody to have joy. But you know, I think that kind of goodwill toward others really only comes from God, you know? Because that's a Christian virtue, isn't it? That we all want people to have joy and satisfaction in life. We just think that there's a right way to do that and a wrong way. Not your own way that you make up for yourself, God's way, the way that he's designed it. See, those are both really broad, though, so let me try to narrow this down. Maybe you can compliment a non-Christian dad who seems to love his kids really well, and he deals with his children very well. And you can say, man, I think the only way you're able to do that is God's blessing in your life. Man, that's a blessing from God that you have such a good relationship with your kids and that they'll listen to you, you know? Or maybe we could do this with somebody in your job. Man, their job performance is outstanding. They work with integrity. They love what they do. It shows. And you can go into them and say, man, I think that's a blessing from God that you do this so well. You do this with integrity. You love your work. I can tell that God has really blessed you in this. See, one of the easiest ways to make the connection is to talk about who God is to you as well. So you could also start to talk about who God is and what he means for you. Share your story of how God's changed you and how you met him. Maybe you ought to go home and practice that this week. You know, if you're on our team, you did have to write that down on your application to enter our launch team in the launch process. Maybe you go back and read that. Maybe you review that. Maybe try to figure out how to share that with somebody in 2 minutes or less. 300 words. Just write it all out, practice it, maybe even practice it in front of other people. It's that important to do if eternity is really at stake here. If it really is a better story, right? Let's not make excuses, okay? I mean, this is what I do for the sermons, believe it or not. I know, I'm getting better and better, okay? But I do actually practice the sermons before I preach them. We have a sermon planning meeting every Thursday night most of the time when we're able to and when it's the right week. But yeah, we have sermon planning meetings so that I can practice it in front of others. And they can give me critical feedback. They can tell me whether something works or doesn't work. So if it's not a good sermon, it's their fault, okay? Just kidding. I need you to keep coming, so don't stop, okay? Everybody's voice is valuable there. But man, this is important. It's eternal. It has wide-reaching cosmic implications. Practice. Practice how you're going to share that with people. You know, we practice for projects at school. We practice in our career. Those things aren't eternal. Practice for eternal things. Make time this week to do that. so that we can play on people's innate knowledge of God, and that'll resonate with them when we share something that's happened in our lives. Third thing I want to share, the last thing as we kind of try to get to the end here, is that Paul shared the good news about Jesus. Okay, I know. These are mind-blowing, aren't they? I mean, it's like the most straightforward sermon I feel like I've ever preached. Because I don't know if you noticed this, but he follows the creation, fall, redemption, restoration narrative that we've talked about a ton with our church. Man, he found the common ground that they believe in a creation event of some sort. He shared who God really was in that, not just one of many gods, but the creator God, the true God over all things, and that we're made in his image, right, to be like him. But then he says that God is calling everyone to repent because there's some kind of brokenness that's there. We have to turn back to God because there will be a day of judgment. We can be assured of that because the man who came into the world, who died for us, he also rose from the dead, right? And it's funny, he doesn't even seem to mention Jesus' name, at least not how Luke wrote it. Luke's the one writing this, and he doesn't even mention Jesus here. But he mentions the creation, fall, redemption, restoration narrative, and he does it in the Athenians' terms. He does it in a way that they can understand. He quotes their poets. He shares the entire thing with them through their lens so that he can get on their level and help them understand it. So before we wind down our time, let me see if I can just give you the most practical thing I can here, good diagram. Okay, who doesn't love a diagram? In cultural terms that I think our American culture can understand, because stories are still so big in our culture. That resonates with people if we help them see a better story of what's going on in reality. So I'd recommend that you think in this direction when you share the gospel with somebody today in our culture here in Roanoke or wherever it is you happen to go, because they use stories over in Africa. They use stories in India. Stories resonate with people, and so we can give them this good story of creation, fall, redemption, restoration. And there are a ton of methodologies, a ton of strategies, right? We could name any one. I could give you any number of diagrams for this, but I think this one's helpful. It's very visual. It's very simple. It's the modified bridge diagram, if you've ever heard of that kind of concept, the bridge diagram. And this is the story of human history from the Christian perspective. So I want to give you a diagram here. Now, God existed before anything else in the universe. So you can write this, you can imagine you're just writing this out on a sheet of paper, or a napkin with somebody, or you're thinking about it in your head, but you start with God because he's eternal. He's the creator of all things. And he wanted to create something that could be like him in physical reality, right? So he created humans to be like him to the rest of creation. So there's God, but now there's humans who are like God. But the problem is, rather than be like God, we desired to be our own God. And so we rebelled against God, right? And that rebellion is a relational break between God and humanity. The Bible calls that rebellion sin. That's all sin is. It's rebellion against God. Now, no matter how hard we try, we can't get back to God. There's a barrier there, a barrier of brokenness and rebellion in our lives, a desire to always do what pleases us rather than what pleases God. We always have to deal with that. We deserve that kind of separation because we basically committed treason against the King of the universe, right? So sinning against an eternal God deserves an eternal punishment. But instead of letting us die, God sent Jesus into the world. Right? He sent Jesus to bridge that gap and to enable us to come back to him. He's the only thing that can break that barrier of sin. And he lived the perfect life that we should all live, but we don't. And then he died the death that we deserve to purchase that freedom for us, to purchase that way back to God. But what completed his mission was that he rose from the dead, and that one day we'll raise from the dead with him if we put our hope and trust in him. And that means we get to be in God's presence forever, and everything will be restored back to a whole kind of restoration where everything's good. All sad things come untrue, as the Jesus Storybook Bible will tell us. You ought to go read that if you haven't. It's not just for kids, okay? It's really good. All of that brokenness will be undone, and God will restore everything. So you can see how this diagram aligns with our creation concept. God, starting with God, he created, but then humans rebelled, so that's the fall, right? And then redemption is that Jesus enters in and breaks down that barrier for us, and then there's total restoration as a result of that one day in the future when he returns to restore all things to their original glory, and original splendor, and original design. Creation, fall, redemption, restoration. So I'm going to do a blog post this week so that you have that diagram and you have this explanation. I'll try to give a few other resources. If you guys have some resources for me that you think would be good to share with others, shoot those to me in an email, because I want this to be helpful for you guys. I want it to be so practical, and I want you to go home and do this. I want you to go home and talk through this. I want you to go home and practice this. I want you to go home and think through how you're going to share it with the people that you know. Remember, I've used this example before, but William Wilberforce, who was an abolitionist back in England in the 1800s, he would go home and write down the conversations he'd had with people that day and think through ways that he was going to share the gospel with them next time they met. We need to be that intentional. It's cosmic. It's cosmic. We have to share this good news. We have to give them the gospel, even if they don't want it. We've got to give it to them, or else, man, that's going to be on our hands, that blood. It's going to be on our head. Man, I could quote Isaiah and go further down that road, but I won't, just for the sake of time. Man, you need to call people to respond after you share this with them as well. There does have to be a response. It has to elicit a response. It's either they're going to reject it, or they're not. They're going to believe it, or they're going to want to pursue it more and have further conversation. But you need to ask somebody, hey, man, have you ever heard that before? Is that something you believe? Does that strike you as true? Or girl, whatever. Hey girl, Hey, man, is this true? Hey, girl, is this true? Do you feel like, does that resonate with you? Do you believe that? Call them to a response. And you know what's going to happen, right? You're going to do this, it's going to feel super awkward. You're going to do this, it's going to feel really weird. You're going to be trembling, you're going to be sweating. Maybe. I mean, it's awkward. And you know what's going to happen? Somebody's going to laugh in your face. Somebody's going to say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. I cannot believe that you believe that. I can't believe somebody who's intelligent like you would ever conceive to believe is something like that. That's going to happen. But you know what else is going to happen? You're going to share it with somebody, and they're going to say, man, I want to hear more about that. That's really intriguing. I've never heard that before. Let's talk more about this. And then they're going to believe. And they're going to enter into the kingdom of God because you are an ambassador to them. You shared the good news story with them, and they're going to believe. Guys, if you never go and talk to people, if you never find common ground with them, if you never engage them where they're at and intrigue them with the knowledge of God that they already have in their lives, and if you never share this good news story with them, they'll never believe it. We need to take that on ourselves. It's that serious. There are people that will be saved because God used you. Man, that's so cool to experience that joy. And as you can tell, I'm pushing you guys to be a go and tell kind of church. We need to go and tell this good news. We need to give the gospel to people. But a secondary way for you to do this is to invite people to come and see. As we talk about this, right? We want to be a go and tell church, but there is also a come and see aspect to this. And you know what come and see really is for us? It's hospitality. That's what it is. We're saying, hey, I'm inviting you into my life. Hey, you know this thing that we just talked about? Why don't you come to church with me and we'll talk more about it? Maybe it would give us a good dialogue to see what I believe. And then you can go to wherever they worship or whatever they do, right? But invite them to come and see here. That's hospitality. And realize too that even with the come and see method, you're not just leaving it up to me to share the gospel up here, although I will. I've made a promise to myself and to God to share the gospel every single time that I preach. I will never not share the gospel in some form or fashion, okay? And you can hold me to that. But don't just rely on me to do it for you. That's not what come and see is all about. That's not why we are going to invite people here. We're going to invite people so that you can then have a further conversation with them, so that you can engage. That's why we're going to invite people. Show them hospitality, engage with them, find the common ground, ask questions, share the gospel again. Man, they're probably going to have to hear it over and over and over again. If they're like me and they're thick-headed, they're going to have to hear it from you. But there's one simple step that you can take to get people to come and see. And we gave you the inviter cards that you have on your seats here today. There are 10 of them. And so I want to challenge you guys with these inviter cards to invite 10 people to come and see. Set that as a limit for yourself, not by family either, by individual. That's when it gets real, right? You guys start scrambling to try to get the right person. Like, no, it's my person, you know. No, find 10 people individually. Find 10 people to invite to come and see so that you can engage with them where they are. Maybe it's in a coffee shop and you just have a few minutes. Maybe you're in the checkout line at the grocery store or Target and you just have a couple of minutes to engage somebody. It's not hard at all to tell me, I just moved here. Yeah, because they're checking you out. I just moved here, right? Yeah, I moved here to help plant a church. Or, man, we just started a new church downtown. I would love to just invite you to come to that. Here's an invite. You don't have to come. I'm sorry. If you're not interested, don't worry about it. But I'd just love to invite you to come and be my guest there. That's super easy to do, right? Or maybe it is at work, where it is over the water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, or at lunch or something like that, or you invite them into your life. Maybe you need to set up 10 dinner appointments with people in your home. I don't know what it is for you. I'm spitballing here. I'm trying to give you guys some ideas because I think this is so important. People will not hear the gospel if you don't share. God put us around the people that we are around for a reason. And so that I hope that you'll take the opportunity. We only launch once, right? We only launch once, and I want us to use this momentum. And it's Easter. And guess what? Despite the pandemic, some people will want to come to Easter. I mean, it's subsided. The numbers are going down. Let's hope they continue that trend. It'll be spring, though. People get stir crazy. This happened exactly last year when it became spring and summer. And the pandemic was in full swing then. So you know it's going to happen more. It's been a year now. People are wanting to get out. They're just waiting for you to ask them to have a reason to come out. And if they're not comfortable, that's okay. We have an online service. Invite them to that. Don't take no for an answer in that sense. Engage people. Engage them. There are cosmic eternities at stake here. Don't say no for somebody. Don't say no for them. Some people are going to laugh in your face. Some people are going to scoff. But some are going to say yes. Some of those 10 people that you engage will say yes. Man, think about that. They will. Remember, there are lives at stake here in Roanoke. There's no getting around it. If you're a Christian, then God uses you to reach people. You're an ambassador. Man, if you buck against that, it's not just to your detriment. Right? I mean, it is to your detriment. You won't get to see the joy of somebody having a changed life, but it's to their detriment because they don't know God. We need to take that seriously. Let's not miss out on this opportunity, guys. We'll say it at the end of the service, too, but you need to go lead a restless culture to the redeeming Savior. Let's pray. God, thank you so much that you love us and that you've given us this good news that surpasses all the stories of all the worldviews and all the religions that are in this world. Man, you want so much more than religion. Religion is not enough. You want so much more than rules. You want so much more than us just feeling good in life, however makes us happy. Man, you want the gospel for us. You want us to know you personally, and you want us to live for your design in the world with your purpose as image bearers. Man, I can't wait to talk about that here in a few weeks in our Origins Story series through Genesis 1 through 3. God, please bless that. I just want to pray right now for the people who are invited to that. I pray, God, that so many people come that we have difficulty that week. I pray, God, for at least 100 people. I pray, God, that when our team invites someone, they'll say yes, or at least they'll be intrigued by it, and it will be another way that our team members can share the gospel with them, another way that our team members can love them and find the common ground. God, I just pray for our hearts. I pray that we'll take this seriously, and God, I pray for our fears. We get so afraid. We feel like we don't know. We feel like we can't. God, thankfully, you use broken people. That's how you've been doing it for the last however many thousands of years that humans have been on this earth. God, you've been using us. Thank you. Thank you that we get to participate in your mission. God, help us to find the joy there and not to be afraid. And when we are afraid, just to push through it. Give us boldness as they prayed for in Acts chapter 4, God. If I could see you just shake this place because you're so filling us with your Holy Spirit, God. Just pray that you'll do that. Just pray, God, that you will get glory from everything that we're doing here and that you'll save some because we are here planting a church. God, I don't know what the future holds. It's been a pandemic. It's been hard. Our teams had it hard in multiple ways. But God, we know that you're sovereign, and we know that you do want to use us as your ambassadors. People are the mission. God, thank you. Thank you that we get to participate in that, God. I pray all this in Jesus' holy name. Amen.